If you are sick of feeling stuck in conversations, you never seem to get any better, even though you study loads, then you need to hear this today. Let's get cracking. Hey up, mate, and welcome to this very special live episode of the BritSpeakPod. If you're new around here, my name is Dan. Nice to meet you. My job is to help you feel confident when communicating in English so you can do more cool stuff in your life. And I'm also going to try and help you out understanding British life, British culture, and of course, British English. So today we've got a lot of stuff to cover. So let's have a look, shall we? In today's episode, we're going to be talking all about the number one mistake that non-native speakers make. Could you be making that mistake? Maybe you are. Who knows? We're also going to be talking about the reason speaking practice is so hard, but it's also proper important. And we're going to be looking at the top 3 speaking exercises that you can do even if you're on your own. Okay? And then at the end, we're going to be answering your questions about speaking practice. So if you are watching live, put your comments in the chat and we'll come to them at the end. If you're watching after, still put them there. Maybe we'll talk about it in the next episode. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple or whatever, send me an email with your comments and I'll have a look. Nice one. So today's question of the day is, what is the hardest thing about speaking English for you? Personally for you, what is the hardest part about speaking in English? Is it pronunciation? Is it practice? I don't know. You're going to have to tell me. What do you think is the hardest part about speaking in English? Put your answers in the chat and we'll talk about them at the end. Sound good? I think it sounds pretty good, to be honest. I'm actually messing things up. Of course I am. But if I click on that, there we go. I'm back on full screen. So the first topic today is we're going to be talking about the number one mistake that non-native speakers make, right? So imagine this. You've been studying English for years, donkey's years. But when it's time to speak, your mind just goes blank. All the words disappear. You start tripping over what you're trying to say and you end up feeling proper awkward. It's a bit frustrating, I would imagine. It happened to me in Japanese. If it happens to you in English, I would imagine it's pretty frustrating. The good news is, though, you're not alone. Loads of people feel the same way when it comes to communicating in English, but why? Why does this happen? Why do you keep ending up in the same situation despite how many hours you've spent studying and keeping your head buried in that textbook? Well, actually, it's because lots of people keep making the same mistake over and over and over again, which is not ideal, But the question is, what is that mistake, right? Well, that mistake is too much passive practice and not enough active practice. Happens to the best of us. So when I say passive practice, what I mean is stuff like reading and listening and grammar drills, fill in the gaps, vocabulary lists, that kind of stuff. This is very passive practice. And a lot of us do that kind of thing a lot. And you don't spend enough time doing active practice, which in this case is speaking. And that's probably why when you have to speak, you struggle. It makes sense, doesn't it? So why does this happen? Why do we end up with this situation? Why is this always happening? So there are a few reasons that this could happen. The first is that it feels easier and safer to do passive practice. It's much easier to do your fill in the gaps exercise. It's much safer to review your vocabulary again. Listening to a podcast, there's no danger involved, is there? There's no chance of being embarrassed listening to a podcast. So that's another thing that kind of keeps people in that comfort zone, right? And active speaking is kind of the opposite. You've got to actually physically do something like open your mouth and make noises. That's quite challenging for some people. speaking practice can often involve another person, so you're going to be pretty vulnerable in front of somebody else, because what happens if you make a mistake? What happens if they think you're an idiot? Like, all that kind of stuff's going through your head. So active speaking, it is quite challenging for a lot of people, I think. And it's definitely something that a lot of people don't feel comfortable with. So that's why they end up not doing it so much. The other thing is, when people speak English, they're doing it in real time. When you're reading, you can go back and read it again, read at your own pace. But speaking kind of requires doing things in real time, thinking and moving your mouth and all that stuff. And that means it's much easier to make mistakes, right? And making mistakes is something that people, for some reason, are absolutely terrified of. Like, especially language learners, they're terrified of making mistakes. They're scared to death of saying something wrong. And that can often hold people back. It can make people feel like they don't want to try, because if they try, they might make a mistake and they might not feel very good about themselves. So that's another reason that they end up going back to the more passive practice. It's not cool. A lot of people feel like they don't have chance to do the active practice. They don't have chance to practice speaking in English, which I can kind of understand. There's some reasons that might be true, but there are also loads of reasons that's not true. And we'll get onto that in a bit. But yeah, if you feel like you don't have a chance to practice speaking, you're probably not going to do it very often. It's just fact of life, innit? But this leads to a problem. If you only do passive practice and you don't do active practice, you end up in this situation, right? And you'll continue to struggle with things like thinking in English during a conversation. A lot of people say, I can't think in English. I just have to translate everything in my head. Well, that's because you haven't spent enough time thinking in English in a conversation. It's not just going to happen miraculously. You're going to have to put some effort in, put some practice in. And this might shock you, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. Who would have thought it? Yeah, you're going to struggle to think in English in conversations if you don't do enough active speaking practice. You're going to still have these long pauses while you're translating from your native language into English. How do I say that word in English? How do I make that grammar pattern? Blah, 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 blah. That's going to keep happening to you. You're going to continue to hesitate, and that's going to hurt your confidence, and your confidence is going to stay low when you're speaking, because you're going to tell yourself, I can't do it. I keep making mistakes and having long pauses, and I have to think in my native language, so I can't speak English very well. Yeah, well, that happens. And by doing this, right, you're going to still struggle. No matter how much you study grammar, or how much you study vocabulary, or how much you spend time doing grammar drills, or whatever it is in your passive practice, you're still not going to be able to actually use that stuff in a real conversation because you've never practiced doing it. The amount of people I meet and they're like, Dan, I'm really good at using grammar when it's in my textbook, but I can't use it when I'm speaking. I just don't remember it. That's the problem. That's what's going on. And that's kind of why this is happening. So these are all the bad things that can happen to you. But the good news is there's a solution, a pretty simple solution that I want to share with you today. Now, say this out loud with me. Commit to speaking English out loud every single day. That last part's very important. Every single day. Now, we're not talking an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours a day. Ain't nobody got time for that. For me, 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a push is more than enough. If you do 10 minutes every day, I promise you, you're going to make so much progress when it comes to actually speaking to people in the real world, right? So this works for a number of reasons, yeah? The first reason that this works is it builds muscle memory. If you're constantly practicing English speaking for 10 minutes a day, you're going to get much better at moving your mouth, and your tongue's going to get much better at being in the right position at the right time, and you're going to develop the muscles in your mouth and your face so you can get better at actually making the sounds, right? Imagine going to the gym. You don't just lift a weight once and be like, well, that's that sorted. No, you've got to do it hundreds of times, I'm the wrong person to take gym advice from, but you know what I mean. So better muscle memory is one of the perks of doing daily speaking practice. You're also going to develop a better flow when you're speaking in English. Now, a lot of native speakers, they've got this flow, this rhythm, this melody to their speech that native speakers find easy, but non-natives often struggle with it. They tend to pronounce words individually and it gets a bit robotic, whereas a native speaker will use chunking and linking and all these kind of things. And by practicing speaking, you're much more likely to develop those skills for yourself, so you're going to sound more fluid when you're communicating in English. You're also going to develop the ability to express yourself more naturally without relying on the same expression over and over again like a parrot that's just repeating what they've heard. You can start to actually express yourself a bit more naturally and deeper. The more you practice communicating, the more you practice speaking about your opinions and your thoughts and your beliefs, you're going to get better at doing those things. So you're going to be able to go deeper and you're going to get closer to like you are in your native language. You're also going to develop a quicker response time, which is really important. There's a big thing for English learners where they feel like they have to pause and they have to wait, or they have to think about what they're going to say and then they say it. But that could be like 10 seconds. I'm already bored, to be honest. If I'm talking to you and there's a 10-second delay, I'm already bored. So quicker response time, we're aiming for about 3 seconds. That sounds like a good maximum, I should say, for response time. And by practicing, you're going to develop that quicker response time. Thinking in English, not the podcast from Tom, which is a great podcast, by the way, but the actual idea of thinking in English. Like when I speak Japanese now, I don't think about English while I'm speaking Japanese. I just think and speak in Japanese. It's like having half of your brain for one language and half for the other. And they don't need to connect. You can just switch from one to the other. And thinking in English is something that you'll develop when you're actually practicing speaking a lot. And the most important thing is you're going to boost your confidence, right? By doing regular practice, you're going to see progress. And by making progress, you're going to build your confidence. And that's because confidence comes from doing, not from looking at it. So, we've got to do it more. But about this point, people start telling me, but Dan, I can't do regular speaking practice. I can't do it. It's not possible for me. Here's some things that I've heard people say. I don't have anyone to practice with. You might have heard about this thing called the internet. It connects you to like 7 billion other people. Maybe, just maybe among them 7 billion people, you can find somebody to practice your speaking with. There's access to teachers like me or, whatever platforms you use, Preply or whatever. There's plenty of people on there that you can pay a little bit of money and speak English to. So there's always a way to find people to speak with. There's definitely people around you that speak English. Go to meetup.com, which is a website to find groups of people. Search for language exchange partners. I bet you'll find some. I don't know how to practice. Fair enough. If you've never done speaking practice before, you don't know how to practice speaking. I get that. If you've never been to a gym before, you probably don't know how to do, bicep crunches or no idea what I'm talking about. But you know what I mean? Like you probably need to have somebody show you how to practice and then you'll learn how to practice that way. Another thing people say, I feel weird practicing on my own. Yeah, and everybody feels weird when they start doing something for the first time. Eventually, you start getting used to it and then you don't feel weird. So just in the nicest way, get over it and start practicing. Like, sure, it's always a bit weird if you just like speaking to yourself. It's a bit weird, isn't it? But, you got to get on with it, mate. Nobody cares as much as you do. So just start practicing. I'm too shy to talk to others. Yep, that's going to suck. But you know what helps getting over shyness? Confidence. And do you know how you build confidence? Practice. So there we go. And I don't have enough time to practice. Bullshit. Are you telling me that you can't find 10 minutes at some point during your day? What are you, like a brain surgeon? Like that you can't possibly concentrate on anything else? If you want it, you can find it. 10 minutes while you're having your lunch, while you're on the train to work, while you're having your toilet time, whatever it is, you can find 10 minutes, mate. So I'm not having that. So I've got 3 tips for you to practice speaking more regularly. So the first is I want you to choose a very simple speaking activity. We're talking basics, For example, you can try talking about your day or a recent experience you had. For example, yesterday, I went strawberry picking. So me and my wife woke up early. We got in the car. We drove to Osaka, which is about an hour and a half away, because she's got some family that lives there. And we all went strawberry picking together. And it's a bit weird that strawberry picking happens in January in Japan, but it does. And we ate a load of strawberries, and I felt sick because I ate too many strawberries. So that was my day. You could practice saying something like that about your day. Why not? You could practice asking and answering questions to yourself. So, Dan, what do you think about working from home in 2025? Well, Dan, I think it's a fantastic idea, and I've got 3 reasons for that, blah, 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 blah. Whatever it is, so practice asking and then answering questions. Sounds pretty easy. Pick up a book and read some of it out loud. Everybody's got books, probably, unless you don't like paper. For the environment's sake, I guess you might not have got many books. I've got plenty of books behind me. Pick up one of them, open it to a random page, and read a paragraph. That's going to get your mouth moving. That's going to get your vocal cords going. And that's going to help you practice speaking, even if you're on your own. Wow. So, we're going to pick some kind of simple thing like that. Anything that forces you to speak will be good, okay? So tip number 2, to make the most of this kind of practice, yeah? Record yourself doing the speaking practice. So nowadays, everybody's got one of these things in their hand or the pocket or whatever. You're probably watching me on one of these things right now. Most of the time, they've got some kind of app that's like a recording app, a voice recording app or something like that. Use that, or use your PC to record yourself doing this practice, right? And I know everyone's, but I hate hearing my own voice. Nobody likes hearing their own voice. Take it from somebody that's heard their own voice probably more than most people. I used to be in a band, so I would hear myself recording and singing and all that stuff. And then I became a vlogger when I came to Japan, so I got used to seeing and hearing myself all the time while I'm editing videos. And now I make online content for English teaching, and I edit myself talking a lot. So I've heard myself plenty of times, and I'll tell you something. At first, I hated it. Now, I don't care. It gets easier the more you do it. So yeah, make sure that you're recording your practice. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Because first, it lets you then listen back to it. When you're speaking, it might sound great. When you listen back to it, you might think like, oh my God, my pronunciation's awful. Or like, there's no intonation. The word stress is terrible. The grammar patterns are all wrong. You can only identify your weak points when you then go back and listen to your recordings. And that'll help you decide what you want to work on in the future, right? You can't really do that without recording. If you write something down, you probably want to check it. You want to read it again to make sure it makes sense. This is kind of the speaking equivalent of that. It'll help you keep track as well. Like, if you record yourself now, and then in a year's time, you listen back to that recording, you're like, mate, look how much improvement I've made over the past 12 months. You can actually see that. If you don't record yourself, you can't see that because you've got no recollection, you've got no record of the things you've done. So you can always go back and monitor your improvement because you're recording your practice sessions. Good. And the third tip I've got for you to make the most of your practice is keep track of the activities and the things that you're focusing on. Speaking is a very, very big skill. You can't do all of it at the same time. You're going to have to break it down and focus on different things at different times, right? So you can use a checklist, or, if you've got a notebook or something, you can write down what you're focusing on for this week and how you're going to work on it. But without having some way of monitoring that, you're just going to have to make it up as you go along, and that usually doesn't work. So yeah, try and use a checklist or something. Write down how your practice went afterwards. Get a reflection sheet. Today I thought this went well, but this thing wasn't so good. Next session, I want to improve this thing. And keep a track of that stuff. And then finally, don't just do the same thing every single day. It's going to get boring double quick, mate. So look online for different kinds of practice, different prompts, and new materials that you can use to keep things fresh, because fresh is something that keeps it interesting and it keeps your motivation up, because without that, you're going to get pretty bored, And to help you with that today, I've actually developed something called the 7-day speaking practice plan and checklist. And what this is, it's a PDF that shows you 7 different ways to practice your speaking, one for every day of the week. And it tells you why it's good and what you need to do. But more importantly, it's got a checklist that you can use to monitor your practice. And it's also got things like links to materials and all that kind of good stuff. If you want to get that, it's totally free. All you've got to do is go to the link in the description, or you can go to my website, BritSpeak.co, and it's there to download it today and use that to plan your speaking for next week. Sounds good, doesn't it? Right then, so that is kind of the end of the mistake that non-native speakers make. So with that in mind, we're going to move on to the next point. But before we do that, I just very quickly want to introduce a new product I've made. And this is called the 30-day speaking practice pack. The idea is it's a 30-day email course. And every day at 7 a.m. in the morning, you'll get an email from yours truly, from this guy. And inside that email, there is a video from me that explains what today's speaking practice is. Maybe it's shadowing, maybe it's reading out loud, whatever it is. And it's also going to tell you exactly what to do. And it's full of tips and tricks on things that you should pay attention to and what you need to do to make the most of your speaking practice. It's also got the checklist so you can fill it out, fill out your reflection forms. And I've also personally gathered materials for you. So you don't have to think about what materials you're using. It's all there in the email. We're talking videos, articles, podcasts, everything that you need to do your speaking practice is all there for you. So the only thing you have to worry about is opening your email and doing your practice for the day, and therefore making progress. And this is available right now. You can use the link in the description to check it out. And yeah, join the 30-day speaking practice plan. And I'm sure you'll see some progress in your English speaking. Good. So the second thing I wanted to talk to you about today then is speaking practice exercises that you can do alone, right? So speaking practice is usually much easier to do than you think. I want to show you 3 proper simple techniques that you can do even if you're alone. They'll help you improve your fluency, practice your pronunciation, and help you stop translating in your head so much. So if that sounds good, let's get cracking, yeah? Nice. So, you have to bear with me, I'm not very good at this screen sharing thing yet. Here we go. So, like I was saying, we're going to look at some techniques, okay? The first speaking practice exercise I want to tell you about today is shadowing. Now, shadowing, some people call it echoing, some people call it listen and repeat, whatever you want to call it, it's basically the same thing. And the benefits of shadowing are well known, but these are what I think are the best benefits when it comes to the shadowing technique. Number 1, it improves your pronunciation and intonation. Good stuff. Number 2, it builds fluency and reduces hesitation. Also a good thing. It enhances your listening skills because you've got to listen before you can repeat, so you're getting some listening practice as well. And it'll help you practice things like chunking, connected speech, linking, and all that kind of good stuff. So you get a lot of different kinds of practice from one particular activity, right? Now, if you're not sure what shadowing is, all you got to do is select a short audio clip featuring a native speaker, ideally. And now if you're working on a specific accent, you can find somebody with that accent, or, find a native speaker, video, podcast, whatever it is, yeah? So you're going to find a short audio clip. We're looking for maybe 1 minute, something like that. Then you're going to listen to the clip all the way through, just to understand it. Make sure you know what they're talking about. Make sure you understand what the deal is. Maybe there's some words in there you don't know that you need to look up, but we're just trying to understand it the first time, yeah? And then after that, we're going to go back to the beginning and we're going to listen to it sentence by sentence. At the end of the sentence, you're going to press pause. And what you're going to do is you're going to repeat what that speaker said. You're going to try and copy the intonation, the word stress, the pacing, the linking, the chunking. You're going to try and copy it as closely as you can, like an echo. You say echo, 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 like that. And it's very, very simple technique. It's very, very easy to do. And it practices a lot of things. So the world is full of materials that you can use. Anything that you're into, you can find something that you can use for shadowing practice. Yeah, and I think this is probably one of the best speaking practices you can do, especially if you're on your own. The next bit of speaking practice I would recommend if you're getting started is reading aloud. Now, the benefits for reading aloud are it's going to improve your pronunciation and articulation, because when you read a word, the spelling is not going to tell you how to pronounce that word. For some reason, English spelling and English pronunciation are not really connected very much. So you're going to end up realizing that you don't know how to pronounce a lot of words, so you're going to look it up and you're going to get better at articulating and making specific sounds. It's also going to strengthen your fluency skills and help you build rhythm. When you're reading out loud, even myself as a native speaker, maybe you've seen the episodes that I do with Stu, his Learn English with the News podcast with Stu Sensei. In that podcast, we often read things out loud, and we're both not very good at it because it's something that we don't do all the time. But it does help you understand where you're supposed to pause and where the natural rhythm should be. So it's going to help you develop those skills as well. It also expands your vocabulary and word recognition because you're going to see words and recognize them. And it's also going to show you a bunch of words that you don't recognize that you have to look up. And that's going to help your vocabulary as well. And it's also going to boost your confidence because it's a practice that you can do without anybody else. You can do it completely on your own, and you're going to help build that confidence that way. And it's going to reduce your anxiety because there's no pressure on you to do anything with it. Just your own pace, your own time, just you and the book. It's a pretty calm way to practice speaking. Now, how to do it is pretty self-explanatory, I would imagine. Find a book. Step one, a book or an article or a story or a poem or a tweet if you really want. Oh, they're not called tweets anymore, but whatever. Find some words that are written down. Then read them words out loud with your real voice, not just in your head. Read it with your eyes and say it with your mouth at the same time, yeah? And I want you to focus on clarity, making sure that you are clearly speaking. You're not mumbling. You're not saying between every word. You're clear and you are expressing the words correctly, yeah? And then, as we mentioned earlier, is record yourself on your smartphone. So then you can listen back to it and see how it flows. Does it sound robotic? And make sure that you're doing a good job. So that's reading aloud. Once again, very, very useful bit of speaking practice. And the third technique I've got for you today is an audio diary. Now, this sounds more complex than it actually is, but basically an audio diary is going to give you a lot of benefits. It's going to build your fluency because you're going to be repeating the same kind of thing over and over again, so you're going to get pretty good at saying them. And you're going to reduce your hesitation when people ask you questions, things like, what did you do last week? You're already going to be prepared for that. It's also going to improve your pronunciation, your clarity, your intonation, all of that good stuff that comes from speaking practice. All going to get better with this kind of practice. It helps you to organize your thoughts and deal with ways of expressing yourself. Now, when you do something for the first time, it's difficult. But then you do it for the 100th time, it gets easier, right? Imagine if you play a musical instrument. The first time you make a C chord on a piano or a guitar or whatever, it might be tricky. But the millionth time, you don't even think about it. It's like driving a car. That's a good example. The first time you drive a car, it's proper difficult. 100th time you drive a car, you don't even think about it. So it's like that. And practicing organizing your thoughts and how you're going to express your ideas is something that you'll build during this practice. And like I said earlier, it's really useful for daily life conversations because one thing that people love to do is ask you, so what did you do last weekend? You got anything planned for this weekend? This conversation you'll have about 1 million times, so it's good to practice for that. Now, the audio diary is very easy to do. Record yourself talking naturally for 3 to 5 minutes about your day or something meaningful for you. Take your phone, open your voice recorder. Today is the 7th of January, and it's the 6th of January, Monday, the 6th of January. God, already losing track of days. And today I woke up at 6 o'clock and then I had some toast for breakfast and some coffee and blah, 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 blah. You know, whatever it is you did today. Just practice talking about something like that for 3 to 5 minutes. Don't script what you're going to say. Don't worry too much about it. Just naturally, whatever comes to your mind, say that. And then review that recording. Make sure that you're not hesitating too much. If there's any grammar errors, you can work on them for next time. Make sure that your intonation sounds nice and it's flowing. There's not long pauses. All that stuff that we're trying to make better. Listen back and see how it went. That's a good place to start. Now, I want you to pay attention when you're listening back to repetitive expressions. One thing that we tend to do when we're learning English is we learn one way to say everything. And then we kind of depend on that expression for a long time. And that's not a bad thing. You know, having one way that you're really comfortable to express yourself is not a bad thing. But if you say the same expression 4 or 5 times in that 3 minutes, maybe it's time to find an alternative way to say that. And it'll help expand your expression database. And it'll give you new ways to actually try and express yourself. And it'll help you use new grammar patterns and new vocabulary that you're learning in an active way because you're now trying it out in a real life situation. So yeah, there are all good things that come from that. Now, once again, as I mentioned earlier, I've broken everything again. Of course I have. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the thing that I can do today to help you with this kind of practice is I've developed that 7-day speaking practice plan. Totally free. It's got those 3 exercises, tells you exactly how to do them, as well as some other ones. It's also got reflection sheets. It's also got material ideas. And it's also got a checklist that you can either print out or there's a Google Drive version, all included for free. And like I said to you earlier, if you want to get hold of that, the link is in the description. I think I can make it appear on the screen. There we go. The link is in the description or the show notes. Or you can go to my website, BritSpeak.co, and get it from there. Now then, that's what I've got to say about the secret to speaking better English. But now I want to know what you guys think. So put in the comments your thoughts about speaking English. What's difficult for you? What makes it something that you don't want to do? How can you be better at it? So I'd like to know your ideas. So we've got Sophie in the chat, and she said, this analysis is so true. This is me, shy of speaking in real conversations. Yeah, I understand. Now, shyness is a bit of a personality trait. Introverts, generally, we're quite shy. But you can't use that as an excuse to not practice, you know. You're not really shy on your own in your house, and you can do a lot of these things we talked about today on your own. And I think that, imagine a professional footballer player, Messi, Ronaldo, whatever. Do you think they just walked onto a professional pitch and started doing it? They spent years practicing on their own and then spent even more years practicing with other people in a safe environment. And then they graduate to an actual football pitch, you know? So give yourself a break and understand that it's okay to take your time. It's okay to build your confidence slowly and step by step. We don't have to go from 0 to 100. We just have to go from 0 to 1. So, but yeah, thanks for that comment, Sophie. Very cool. A good mate, Ahmad. He says, I'm a polyglot and I can't make a pure accent, neither focus on one language all day long. Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially if you're a polyglot. You guys have got lots of options for things to practice. For me, I can barely speak English some days, and I can speak a little bit of Japanese, and I can say about 10 words in Portuguese. So I wouldn't I wouldn't say I'm a polyglot by any stretch of the imagination. But I think the idea is that comes up here is like accent is interesting because a lot of people message me. They're like, Dan, I want to learn a British accent. Why? You're not British. Why would you have a British accent? Like, it don't make sense to me. Like, your accent is part of your identity. Like, if you're from Spain, why would you want to give up your Spanish accent? It's part of who you are, right? As long as you can pronounce things clearly and you can be understood when you communicate, you don't need to change your accent. Your accent is probably bloody lovely. And if anybody makes you feel bad about their accent, they're the idiot. You don't need to change for an idiot, I'm telling you. So thank you very much for that comment. Good stuff. Serge says, do like me. Take a book and read it out loud. I do it while walking in the woods. Maybe people think I'm crazy. Well, you know, who's crazy? Everybody's a bit crazy, mate. So we all do weird things. And I think that happens to the best of us. But yeah, reading a book in the woods, if it works for you, mate, then that's what you should do. There's always a thing that works for everybody. And I think in this case, reading a book out loud in the woods, as long as it boosts your confidence and helps you better understand what your weak points are in English, then that's a good thing. So thank you very much then, everybody, for getting involved with today's live stream. I proper enjoyed it. I proper enjoyed having a bit of a chat with you about this kind of stuff. Later on this week, this will be out as an audio podcast as well. So if you haven't already, you can find me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that stuff. Or you can just, subscribe on Facebook or on YouTube, wherever you're listening or watching this video from. Now, next week, we've got some interesting stuff planned for the podcast for next week. And the idea is that we're going to be talking about the British TV and how you can use British TV shows to start practicing speaking in English and how you can get a better idea about British English and slang and all that good stuff just from TV shows. So if you're interested, make sure you check back for that next week. But thank you very much for listening to this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. But that's it for me today, and I'll catch you again next week. See you there.